Wyoming Territory, 1881. The wind was still biting cold in April when Zadie Whitlow stepped off the stagecoach in Rawlins, her wedding dress stuffed into a carpetbag and her hands resting over the small swell of her belly. She had not cried when Samuel told her to go. He had stood on the porch of his father's ranch house, his jaw clenched tight and his eyes flicking anywhere but her face. "You should have told me," he had said, his voice hard. "I cannot marry you now. My family would never allow it." Her belly wasn't even showing then, just a secret flutter inside her that only she knew. But she had told him, thinking he'd want to protect her, thinking he'd love her more for it. Instead, he sent her back to her sister's tiny home in Laramie with a letter of apology and no intention of ever seeing her again. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, with her sister's husband gone to Cheyenne for work and 3 small children crammed into one room, Zadie knew she could not stay. Her sister never said it, but the exhaustion in her eyes spoke louder than words. Zadie was one more mouth to feed, and soon she would bring another. So she packed her carpetbag, kissed her nephews and niece goodbye, and took the stage west. But when the coach rattled off, leaving her alone by the dusty outpost of Rawlins, Zadie realized she had no plan past this. Her money was nearly gone. She had no man, no home, and a baby growing inside her. She sat on a bench outside the general store, her boots stiff with dust, her hands shaking from cold and fear. "Miss, you all right?" The voice came low and kind. She looked up. The cowboy standing in front of her was tall, broad-shouldered, with a well-worn hat and sun-browned skin. His eyes were a deep brown that seemed to hold both the present moment and some long memory. His shirt was tucked neat under his suspenders and his boots were scuffed but clean. Zadie stood quickly, wiping her palms on her skirt. "I am fine." "You sure?" he asked. "You look like you've been rode hard and left out in the wind." Zadie offered a tight smile. "I just got in." "Name's Nolan Oakes," he said, tipping his hat. "I work out at the Hammond place north a ways. Was just coming in for supplies." She hesitated. "Zadie Whitlow." He glanced at the carpetbag, then back at her face. "You waiting on someone?" "No," she said quietly. "There is no one." Nolan's eyes lingered a moment, then he nodded. "Well, you best come inside then. You look like you need something warm, and I think Mrs. Poe has a kettle on." Once inside the store, Zadie felt the warmth hit her skin, and her shoulders sagged with relief. Nolan spoke with the shopkeeper, an older woman with a sharp gaze softened by age. A tin cup of tea was pressed into Zadie's hands a moment later. Nolan leaned against the counter. "You got any place to go? I will find something." "You got family here?" "No," she said. "My sister is in Laramie, but she cannot take me in." Mrs. Poe glanced between the two of them, then busied herself behind the counter. Nolan studied her a moment. "You pregnant?" Zadie's fingers tightened around the cup. "Yes," he nodded slow. "And the man who should have stood beside you, he did not." Her eyes met his. There was no judgment there, just quiet understanding. "He sent me back," she whispered. Nolan set his package of flour on the counter. "That just means you are twice as brave." She blinked, stunned by the words. "What?" "Carrying a child alone," Nolan said gently. "Walking into a town with nothing to your name and no one at your side takes guts." A lot more than that man had. She stared at him, unsure if she wanted to cry or fall into his chest. Instead, she whispered, "I do not know what to do." Nolan looked at her a long moment. "I got a cabin out by the Hammond line. It is not much, but it is warm. You can stay there." "Just until you get your footing," she stiffened. "I cannot accept that." "You would not be," he said. "I will sleep in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Cabin's just sitting empty now, and it gets sad when it is quiet too long." Zadie hesitated. "Why would you do that for me?" he shrugged. "You look like you need a place to land. and I do not mind being the one that helps you find it." The ride out to the cabin was quiet, the wagon creaking beneath them as sagebrush whispered past. Zadie kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the horizon, not daring to hope. When they reached the little one-room cabin nestled against a line of cottonwoods, her breath caught. It was small, yes, but tidy, and there was smoke curling from the chimney. "You keep a fire going in a place you do not sleep." "I stop in sometimes," Nolan said, lifting her bag from the wagon. "I built it with my brother. He died 2 winters ago. I could not bring myself to give it up." Zadie's voice softened. "I am sorry." He nodded once. He would have wanted someone to use it. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and smoke. A cot sat near the hearth, and there was a table with 2 chairs, a shelf of books, and a carefully patched quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Nolan set her bag down gently. "You can stay as long as you need." Zadie turned to face him. "Thank you, Mr. Oakes." "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not need to repay me," he said. "Just take care of yourself, that child too." Her hand moved to her stomach. "I will." He cleared his throat. "I will come by every few days, bring food, check the firewood. If you need anything, send word with one of the ranch boys." "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. He started toward the door, then paused. "Do not let what that man did make you think you are not worth loving." Zadie stared at him, throat tight. Nolan tipped his hat. "You get some rest." Then he was gone, and Zadie stood in the quiet warmth of a stranger's kindness, her heart aching in a way that was both old and brand new. She had come to Rawlins with nothing, but for the first time in weeks, she did not feel entirely alone. By the second morning, Zadie had learned the rhythm of the place. The hearth took coaxing to keep lit, and the pump behind the cabin gave cold, clean water only after a dozen good pulls. She'd found the small root cellar Nolan mentioned tucked into the hillside, where there were potatoes wrapped in burlap and a jar of pickled beets sealed tight. The wind sounded different here, less sharp than it had in town, more like something breathing low through the cottonwoods. It filled the silences in her mind that had grown too loud since leaving Laramie. She was washing the tin plate from her breakfast at the basin when the sound of hooves crunching over frozen dirt made her turn. Nolan had tied his gelding to the post and was walking toward the cabin with a parcel wrapped in oilcloth under one arm and a tin pail in the other. "You eat anything besides dry bread yet?" he asked as he stepped inside. "I boiled a potato," she said. "It wasn't much, but it was warm." "Then this'll be better." He laid the parcel on the table and unwrapped a wedge of cheese, a hunk of bacon, and half a loaf that looked fresh from a Dutch oven. "Cook's been in a good mood. I think her niece wrote her from Kansas City." Zadie glanced at the food, then back at him. "You didn't need to bring all that." "I didn't bring it for needing," Nolan said, setting the pail beside the door. "I brought it because I thought you might want something good today." She hesitated, then picked up the cheese and sliced a thin piece. "You always that thoughtful?" "No," he said, taking off his gloves, "but I've been learning to pay attention." She took a bite, then sat. "You mentioned your brother built this cabin with you. Was he older than you?" "By 2 years," Nolan said. "Name was Ali. We came out from Missouri when we were boys. Folks didn't take to the dust and long winters, but Ali did. Said the land made him feel like he could breathe." She nodded slowly. "What happened to him?" "Fell through the ice one March," Nolan said, voice quiet but steady. "Creek near the Hammond fence line. Water was running faster than it looked." Zadie studied his face. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but his hand tightened slightly on the edge of the table. After a moment, she said, "You think you'll ever build another place of your own?" "Maybe," he said. "But I figure it's not worth hammering boards unless someone's waiting inside for you." Zadie's hand stilled on the bread. "You were close, weren't you?" Nolan nodded. He was the kind of man who made people feel seen. Not by talking loud, he just listened. Folks told him things they didn't tell no one else, like he was part of the land, something meant to hold your weight. Zadie looked down at her hands. I used to think Samuel was like that, quiet, kind. Turns out he only wanted the parts of me that didn't ask anything back. And you, Nolan asked, you still want what you hoped for before him? I don't know, she admitted. There's a part of me that wants to say I don't, that I just want peace now, but I think I still want someone who stays. Nolan's eyes didn't shift from hers. Then I hope you find that, not because you need it, but because you deserve it. She swallowed, her throat dry. You say things like that and make it feel like they might be true. They are, he said. The fire popped and neither of them moved for a long moment. Then he stood and picked up the pail. There's cream in here. Figured you might want it for your tea. She took it from him, fingers brushing briefly against his. Thank you. He stepped back toward the door, pausing only to glance once over his shoulder. I'll be back the day after tomorrow. I'll bring more wood. Maybe some coffee too if the store has it. She opened the door for him. I'll be here. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at his coat as he mounted the gelding. Zadie watched him ride off until he disappeared behind the rise. Then she turned back inside, the cream still cool in her hand, and sat near the fire. She didn't know what lay ahead. But she felt steadier than she had in weeks. And that, she realized, had started the moment he'd said not that she was foolish, not that she was to blame, but that she was brave. Snow came overnight, just a light dusting, but enough to paint the land in silence. Zadie stood barefoot at the threshold, steam rising from the mug in her hands, watching flakes drift through the trees like ashes. Her breath clouded the air, and the boards beneath her feet were cold enough to bite. But still she lingered, drawn by that hush that made the world feel suspended. By the time Nolan returned, the snow had melted into the dirt, leaving the ground soft and the air smelling of wet pine. He brought oat flour and dried pears bundled in cheesecloth, and a coat that had once belonged to his mother. She was small, he said, laying it across the chair without asking. Didn't care much for town, but she liked to sew, lined that one herself. Zadie touched the fabric, deep brown wool, worn smooth at the cuffs but warm and heavy in her arms. I couldn't take something that belonged to her. She'd have offered it, Nolan said. She always had a soft spot for women finding their own way. Zadie turned toward the hearth. I'm not sure I'm doing much of that. Mostly feels like I'm waiting for something I can't name. He watched her stir the pot on the stove before he said, that's part of it. Waiting. Listening. If you're quiet long enough, sometimes answers come, she glanced back. And if they don't, then maybe it's not time yet. After supper, they walked the edge of the clearing, boots sinking slightly into the thawing ground. The sun was low, staining the sky with pink and gold. She kept one hand on her belly, the other brushing against the folds of the coat. You want children? She asked, not looking at him. His answer came slow. I used to think about it. After Illy passed, I stopped letting myself. She turned to him. Why? Didn't seem fair. To bring someone into the world when I couldn't protect the ones already in it. But you're not the one who failed him. No, he said. But grief don't care about sense. It just settles in your bones and tells you lies. They walked a few more paces. I was afraid to tell Samuel, she said. Not because I thought he'd leave, I thought he'd stay but resent me for it. He didn't stay, Nolan said. No, she whispered. He didn't. He stopped then, and she did too. The birds had gone quiet in the trees. You want someone to stay now, Zadie? He asked, voice low. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. I don't know. I think I want to believe it's still possible. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer. Just stood steady beside her like something rooted. You don't have to decide now, he said. But I'll keep showing up until you do. That night, she dreamt of water clear and cold, running strong through a green valley. She stood in the middle of it, not afraid, the current moving around her without pulling her under. When she woke, the fire had burned low, but the cabin was still warm. She got up, wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The moon hung low behind the clouds, and the trees whispered under a soft breeze. She stood there a long while, hand resting on the curve of her stomach, and thought of Nolan's voice, quiet, certain, not asking anything of her but truth. Inside, the coat still held the scent of cedar and old tobacco. She wrapped herself in it and sat by the fire, feeling something shift inside her, small but sure. A seed stirred, not just of the child she carried, but of a future she had begun to imagine. One built not out of rescue but choice, and maybe, just maybe, love. By late April, the thaw reached the higher ridges, and swollen creeks carved new lines through the pasture land. Zadie had begun to feel the weight of the baby more acutely, an ache in her back when she bent too long at the stove, a tug low in her belly when she rose too fast. Still, she moved through the days with steadier breath. The cabin no longer felt borrowed. Nolan arrived that morning with a bundle of early greens tied in a strip of muslin and a sack of dried mint from the Hammond cook's herb shelf. His boots were caked in mud up to the ankles, and a cut along his jaw looked fresh, though neatly cleaned. "What happened?" Zadie asked as he set the bundle on the table. "Colt spooked near the east pasture," he said. "Tore the fencing good, took half the morning to walk him down." "I wasn't quick enough." She reached for a clean cloth and dipped it in warm water. "Sit. I've had worse." "I didn't ask that," she said, and he sat. She dabbed the cloth gently along the edge of the cut. His skin was warm beneath it, the scrape shallow but wide. He watched her hands, his own resting open on his knees. "You do this often?" he asked. "Clean cuts?" "No. Step in when someone won't ask for help." She smiled faintly. "Only when they show up at my door bleeding." He chuckled low, then quieted. "You always this calm?" "Not always," she said, rinsing the cloth. "But I've learned that panic doesn't stop anything from hurting. It just makes the hurt run deeper." He leaned back slightly, eyes following her as she moved to the stove. "You learned that from your mother?" "No," she said, stirring the pot. "From being 19 and alone in a boarding house with a fever that nearly killed me. I had to decide then whether I'd wait for someone to save me or figure out how to stand up on my own." He was quiet for a moment. "You stood." "I did." She ladled soup into 2 bowls and set one in front of him. He didn't speak again until he'd taken several bites. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" he asked, not looking at her. "I did," she said. "Before, I used to dream about St. Louis, maybe even Chicago. Somewhere with sidewalks and music spilling from windows. And now," she looked out the small window where a robin hopped through wet grass. "Now I think I want to raise this child where the wind knows my name." He set his spoon down. "You want to do it alone?" "I'd rather not," she said, her tone even. "But I won't let that want make me foolish again." He met her eyes, his voice quiet. "You think wanting someone is foolish? I think trusting the wrong man to want the same things I did was." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I'm not him. I know. That's why you're still welcome at my table." Outside, the sky had turned soft with dusk. The smell of fresh earth drifted through the cracked window. Nolan rose, walked to the door, then turned. "I'm building a gate near the north fence this week. Never liked the way the cattle bottleneck there. Might take a few days." She stood, brushing stray crumbs from her apron. "I'll keep the fire going till you're back." He hesitated, then said, "I've never known a woman who made silence feel like something you could lean on." Zadie stepped closer, the space between them narrowing like a held breath. "I've never known a man who didn't flinch when I spoke plain." He tipped his hat, slower this time. "Then maybe we're both do something better." Her fingers grazed the doorframe as he left, her pulse steady beneath the skin. She watched until he vanished past the trees, not with fear this time, but with a quiet certainty that some men didn't just offer steadiness, they stayed. The gate Nolan had planned took longer than expected. Spring rains turned the ground to mire, and the posts had to be dug twice when the first set leaned under weight. He came by less often, but when he did, he stayed longer helping Zadie carry water, showing her how to stretch her aching back against the doorway beam, bringing dried apple slices he claimed were only slightly burned. One afternoon, close to dusk, he arrived on foot, his hat damp with sweat and his hands wrapped in cloth. Zadie was sitting outside on the porch step, mending a hem. She looked up. "Fence win the fight." He pulled the wrapping off one hand, revealing a long, splintered gash along his palm. "Only just." She set the needle down. "Come inside." They sat at the table in the soft evening light, her hand steady as she cleaned the wound with warm water and wrapped it in clean linen. She said nothing until the work was done. "I heard from my sister," she said, tying the cloth neatly. Her husband's decided to move them to Colorado Springs. Railroad work. Nolan flexed his fingers. "That far?" She asked if I wanted to come. He looked up then, his face unreadable. "Do you?" She let the silence stretch. "I don't think I do." He nodded once slowly. "Then you've made your own place." "I'm trying to," she said, "but I can't do it halfway, not with a child coming." "You don't have to explain it to me." "I'm not explaining," she said gently. "I'm asking." His brow rose. "Asking what, if you mean to stay in my life, Nolan? Not just with firewood and fence posts, but really stay." His jaw worked slightly, like something old and careful was shifting loose inside him. "I wake up most mornings wondering what you're doing. I go to sleep thinking I should have said more while I was here." She didn't move, just watched him. "I've never been the sort who talks first," he admitted. "But I've been honest with you every step, and I'm not looking for a place to pass through. I'm looking for something I can build. If that's here with you, then say the word." Her eyes didn't waver. "I want you beside me. Not because I need someone to lean on, but because when you're here, I don't brace against the world so hard." He reached across the table, his injured hand careful as it curled around her fingers. "I'll be here, Zadie, for the child, for you, for whatever comes." The days that followed were slow and full. Nolan moved his things into the cabin in quiet stages, a coat hung beside hers, his boots by the hearth when the nights cooled again. He came home tired but content, and she began to hum while stirring pots, a low sound that made the cabin feel more like a home than any roof she'd ever slept under. When her labor came, it was the middle of the night. The sky was clear and full of stars, and Nolan was already awake, sensing something in the change of her breath. He saddled the horse without a word and rode for Mee Hammond, the ranch foreman's wife, who had birthed 6 children of her own and knew how to keep fear from taking root. By morning, Zadie held a daughter in her arms, a red-faced, squalling thing with Nolan's wide-set eyes and a grip like a burdock burr. He sat beside them, knees muddy, his hair still wet from the ride. Zadie leaned her head against his shoulder. "She'll need a name." He looked down at the bundle. "You're choosing." She traced the baby's brow. "Clara, after my grandmother." She had a sharp tongue and a braver heart. "Then she'll fit right in." They buried the old fears in the days that followed, not with words, but with the way Nolan rose each morning to tend the stove before Zadie stirred, or how she learned to patch his shirts without being asked. In the evenings they sat by the fire, Clara asleep in the cradle Nolan had carved from pine. One evening, weeks later, Nolan stepped outside and returned with a small box wrapped in a handkerchief. He knelt beside her, his hand steady. "I don't have much in the way of pretty," he said. "But I've got this." Inside the box lay a ring silver banded with a narrow piece of turquoise set in the middle, smoothed down by time. "It was my mother's," he said. "She used to say a ring don't make a marriage, but it sure tells the world how you feel." Zadie pressed her fingers to her lips. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not just to give the child my name. I want to wake up beside you till we're both gray and soft around the edges." She reached for his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "Yes, I want that." They married under the cottonwoods, simple and quiet, with me, Hammond, and her husband standing witness. Clara cried halfway through, and Nolan rocked her in one arm while saying his vows with the other. The seasons turned. Snow came again, then melted once more. Clara grew strong, her laugh loud and fearless. Zadie planted a garden behind the cabin, and Nolan built a second room with his own hands. The land didn't give anything easy, but it gave honestly, and that was enough. They grew together like two trees leaning into the same wind. Not perfect, not without aches, but rooted, steady, and always, always together.